Our next speaker is Dr. Avilés, Organización Boricua de Agricultura Económica, and her talk is titled The Importance of Socio-Environmental Diversity for Caribbean Islands in the Face of Climate Change. Examples since September 2017. Please welcome Dr. Avilés.
Okay, so I shifted a little bit since listening to the morning sessions, and I appreciate and thank Dr. Lula for that perfect segue into the necessity for social and environmental diversity within our systems. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is present a little bit about positionality, talk about a little bit of background on how we got here, then compare some of the responses that we were able to document through Organización Boricua, which is an agroecology organization here in Puerto Rico that's over 30 years, and this is really low. I'm just sitting still. So highlight some adaptive strategies that we were able to document, and then end proposing a different model for what we have been doing kind of as modus operandi since Maria. So a little bit about positionality. Right after, a week after the hurricane, I remember one of the things, the first thing everyone did was go out, see what happened, and start giving out water and food, and opening pathways, and making sure that our people were safe, and then opening it up, and then making sure that more people got food and more people got water, and everyone was taken care of. It was one day in November that I got the letter saying, "We're sorry, this is a historic event, and the board of directors has decided to discontinue your job, and we wish you luck for your future plans, but these donations for the future are going to have other priorities." And that is truly when Maria hit me. That's the moment I felt the rug pulled from under me, and that was the first time that I realized that I had been operating as if I address this crisis in particular, I'm going to be able to go back to my job and then go back to that steady state, bounce back, have that resilience, and have my job secure. And I realized how much hypocrisy goes into that. And it forced me to have that flexible capacity of sometimes we have that stability and we don't account for it when we're making papers or when we're making public policy in our air-conditioned rooms or the air-conditioned COE, for those of you that saw that place. This is from May this year. 25% of Puerto Ricans are still facing Maria. My house still doesn't have a roof, still haven't been paid for it, and that's the reality we're facing. We haven't gone. There is no steady state to go back to. And it is not climate change for 2080. It is the fact that 3,000 Puerto Ricans died in 2017. So we need to face that change. And part of it needs to happen. That jolt happened for a lot of us with Maria, and some of us are still locked in those air-conditioned offices, writing papers and writing public policy and not realizing that things are never going to get back to where they were. So, how did Puerto Rico get to the incredibly weak place it was when Maria hit? There's obviously a history of political economy. So in 1947, Operation Bootstrap was implemented, and the idea behind Operation Bootstrap was actually to have, I just realized there should be a right-hand bias, and I'm having a left-hand bias. I'm gonna go this way. So in 1947, Operation Bootstrap gave incentives, tax incentives to international companies so that they could settle in Puerto Rico, and the idea was that Puerto Rico was going to be the showcase of the Caribbean. It was a counterweight to the workers' revolt that was cooking up in Cuba. So it's essential that people were taken out of the rural, because rural and agriculture meant poverty. But it also meant, this is really important, it also meant that Puerto Ricans were producing what they were consuming. And the outspoken US policy was actually to have the Caribbean be a consuming appendage of US agriculture. In order to have that, you have to transform and change both the way Puerto Ricans live and the way what they produce. So it was focused, and you can see here, and we've talked a little bit about agriculture today, but you can see the green is how our consumption of what comes from outside increased and what we produce locally decreased. And most of that consumption, of course, comes from the United States. That's 76%. A lot of it comes in as dumping, but it's not considered so because we are part of the US territory. It's a US territory. What's really interesting is that in the 1970s, and we have Vivian Carro here is one of the authors of that, in the 1970s, Puerto Rico became one of the first places to have supermarkets. And that combined with the use of food stamps. So that consolidated Puerto Ricans' role as producers of goods that they could not consume and consumers of goods that they did not produce. And this is really important to understand where we're at now. So, Operation Bootstrap, complete failure. We need to eliminate Section 936 because you cannot have tax incentives in a US, as part of the US. They eliminate them, and income revenue for the government starts to go down. And the government, instead of facing that reality, starts compensating for it by increasing debt, taking out loans, and let's take more loans. And you can see here, this is our economy dipping, and this is the loans being taken out. So that's how the Puerto Rican government compensated, right? And then we have the Obama administration imposed the fiscal board to control the debt, because finally we hit that wall and said, whoa, we cannot pay this, there's no way. And the way that they've done it is, their recipe has been, like in many other places, cut back services and eliminate resources for the most vulnerable populations in Puerto Rico. In this case, this is one of the closed schools here where we've had more than hundreds of schools closed down. And that's the scenario that Maria hits in. So even before Maria, we were already facing a very precarious situation. And when we go out, particularly when we go out to see farmers and look for farms, this is the scene that we face. This is just pictures of members of the different farms within Boricua. This actually used to be a path. And it was actually a flight path before the hurricane. So the thing is, and what's really important to understand is that farmers are scientists. They experiment every day. They know already that that flowering is coming off, that the way the fruits are coming out and it's not at the right time, that it's not syncing with the insect. They've identified that ever since 2015. This is not news for farmers because they see it and they live it and they practice it and they experiment on every single day. And that farm, that they knew every single corner, they knew which soil was best for this plant. That farm, in the blink of an eye, was gone. And it was a completely different landscape, a completely different farm, and in many, many cases, not even a home to go back to in that farm. This is one of my favorite pictures, and this is actually a picture from Maga, the president of our organization, who's here, and has been a key part of all this process. Here you see how it looked out the window, and after Maria, many amazing things happened. One of them is you even see a new stream come here. So the entire hydrology, the geography of the zone, which she had been familiarized with, completely shifted. She has to start again to relearn and fall in love and learn how this new landscape is going to be played out. So the aftermath of Maria, the disaster was very natural. Everything we saw there happened because of a natural system. But everything that happened afterwards and before was completely man-made. And if anyone there says different, they need to look at the facts. And we've been talking all this morning about facts. So one of the things that we faced and what we did as part of the organization was look at how is this working out. We had already a government that was based on populist authoritarian beliefs. And in this particular case, after Maria, instead of following mitigation plans that were there, they decided to centralize the documentation of materials that were rubbed, that were supposed to be distributed to different communities that never got there. they started creating new bureaucracies on top of already existing plans. We know Fortress exists for a reason, we know the COE, etc. So our goal was to go out in work brigades and do precisely what we think is going to work and has been working for farmers to survive in a context in which in Puerto Rico, people think farmers should become extinct 50 years ago after Operation Bootstrap, and yet we have persevered. So the work brigades here, you see that pool of water wasn't there before Maria, so there you're taking resources to that farm and opening access to different farms, start farming it, the emotional impact of having had your entire life turned upside down or wiped out. This particular farmer could actually not go back in. So we went with a brigade, and this was the result of one day of work. And he was able to get back on his feet. So while we had agroecological farmers, or farmers that have sustainable practices, actually have a recovery that was within weeks. We had a Puerto Rico that was starving, that had to ration its food and its water, that was dying of desperation and hunger, and we had deaths from hunger. And you had widespread recaudación, collection of money that was not being given to those who were dying of hunger. So one of the things that our ecological farmers did different, and the key here, and that's what Ariel was talking about, sets, that diversity of knowledge, of cultural techniques is really important. So what was one of the things that we did right after the hurricane? We helped each other, but we also went out and saw what was out there. So there was no water, but there were a whole bunch of coconut on the ground. There was plantains, and so we had to relearn and transform the way we look at food, how we collect food, what is our diet, and how we prepare and preserve the food. So you had farmers that had been given and instilled into the industrial type of agricultural production that were literally starving in their own lands. And you had a new type of farming that's re-emerging that actually had a new kind of diversity. A seed organization in which we shared seeds, and even within 5 weeks after Maria, we had production in agroecological farms that could be sold in markets. And farmers themselves, in many cases, chose to share it amongst mutual support centers so that they could then be spread amongst those farmers and neighbors and communities that were not able to have access to food. Just to give you a really brief example, I love this image. Here you have a little bit of amaranth, and right after the hurricane, it's about 4 weeks, and you already have biodiversity back. How many of us remember not hearing the cookies or not hitting the birds and everything? And yet these farms, because they had such an incredible diversity within them, were able to attract pollinators almost immediately. And of course, bringing that detritus and bringing all of this back into the cities. Cities are black holes of consumption. So how do we then shift and transform that and bring that energy that was lost in the woods and in the lost food into the areas? Here in this case, urban farms and garden support, for example, La Perla, which had a mutual support center and had a local huerto. I believe Mara is here, or she was here, she was from that. Yep, there we go, Mara was one of the key people doing this type of work. And we have linkages with our neighboring islands, which we can't do because we're part of the US, or part of US politics, right? So in this image, you have a farmer from Vázquez, a farmer from the US, and a farmer from St. Croix. And I dare you to find which one is which. Because they were able to exchange knowledge and exchange ways of doing things. I have 1 minute left, and I have to fly through this. This was from an exchange we did with Cuba, with a completely self-sufficient farm. This farmer was actually showing us how to build a more resistant orchard or garden. And this was cool, and I want to give this example just because of Ariel, but this particular farmer had a little bit of a planting forest, and he had understory, he had middle canopy, and the highest canopy. Irma went through Cuba, if you guys remember, it just completely wiped the northern coast. This farm was in its path. The hurricane got the large plantain trees, and the understory came up right after, so he never missed plantain production because he had this integrated agroecological system. So what we're proposing is a different way of doing things. Instead of going back to that status quo, of having aid, extraction, and displacement, which is what's being proposed now, as an organization and linking with people from Louisiana that we were able to link through different alliances, we truly propose a long-term change that gives power to people. Because we cannot let this be just a matter of those who are lucky enough to survive a highly unjust system. This has to be about building power from below, building power from within, so that people have the alternative, so that we can recreate and relearn the ways to do things so that we can survive within the Caribbean islands. And most importantly, understanding that this can only come from the grassroots. And through this process is the only way that we'll be able to truly change the system rather than trying to go back to a steady state resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much.